But I'm not here because of who I am. I'm here because of what I do. And what I do is the best job in the entire world. Everybody who loves football should have my job for a day. You see, I'm the guy that after Selection Saturday, when we select the class each year for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, I'm the guy that gets to knock on the door and welcome them as one of the 303 best football players, coaches, or contributors to the game of all time. That's a pretty cool job. You know, a couple years ago when I first got this job, we'd fly them all to New York. And at that time, that day, we went so long, the debate was 10 hours. And so we didn't have time to knock on the door, so we had to call them because we had to get them to Radio City Music Hall, you know, in about 15 minutes so that they could be introduced to the nation live on TV. And my first call was to Michael Strahan because he was actually at his house. We had to get him across town and get him over there. The next call was to Derrick Brooks because Derrick Brooks is a friend of mine and I've known him for a long time. He's a spectacular guy. And so I just wanted to tell him, hey, Derrick, guess what? You're in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. My third call was to a guy named Ray Guy. Ray's the only punter in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He invented the word hang time. So when I called him, he almost didn't answer because I'm area code 714 and he was looking for Canton, which is 330. But fortunately, he answered, and that southern drawl, he said, hello. And I said, Ray, this is Dave Baker, president of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And he said, yes, sir. I said, Ray, it is my great pleasure. And I got that far, and I could hear him fall to the ground. And his phone is rattling around. And his wife is saying, honey, sweetheart, are you okay? Baby, are you all right? And I thought I'd killed my first Hall of Famer. But then he got up, and he said, I'm so sorry. He'd been a finalist 29 years, 9 times. He had been a finalist and not selected out of that time. He said, I'm not sure I knew even until now what this meant to me. So that's where guys end up. They end up on that stage in Canton, Ohio. They end up with a bronze bus that's supposed to last for 40,000 years. But I'm so excited to talk to all of you because you are the coaches and the coaches for the coaches for where the game begins. And you see, at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, it's not just about knocking on the door. We're the guardians of this game. When people attack the game, when people speak about it, you know, the game doesn't speak for itself. But we've got all the history from when it started. We've got Walter Camp's notes there, you know, from when he first made up the rules for college football. Our mission at the Pro Football Hall of Fame let's see if I can't do this right here. There we go. Our mission at the Pro Football Hall of Fame is to honor the heroes of the game, to preserve its history, to promote its values, and to celebrate excellence everywhere. It's not just hero worship. You know, yes, these are great football players, but let's remember that we got O.J. Simpson's bust in that gallery too, and I make no value judgment on O.J. But it does say that not any of us are perfect all the time. But each one of these guys, for one moment in time, for a certain portion of their career, were so spectacular that they made others better and they drug them along with them to this place where they overcame their own humanness, a place of excellence. The game teaches you about respecting other people that are different than you and sometimes weaker than you. You know, it teaches you that nobility of defending and working for somebody else. It teaches you about respect for yourself, about respect for your teammate, and ultimately, it teaches you about respect for your opponent. But it also teaches you excellence. The great Vince Lombardi said that you can never achieve perfection, but if you chase perfection, you might just catch excellence. And so therefore, our vision at the Pro Football Hall of Fame is it's not just about the past, it's really about the future. It's not just about Canton, it's about taking that message to the rest of the world. And it's not just a great museum for football, it's a message of excellence for everyone everywhere. You know, a great thing happened to me at the Super Bowl. amidst knocking on the door, amidst getting our guys to the Super Bowl, amidst getting them on the honor show, our staff was having breakfast on Sunday morning. And a young kid who had been to enshrinement, about 10 years old, came up and asked if he could have my picture taken next to me. A lot of people like to have their picture taken to me because I make them look thinner. But this kid didn't need anything, so he was just excited to have his picture taken. He's got his 8-year-old brother in there. And so I had my chief of staff, Pete Fairley, with me, and I said, "Hey, Pete, can you dig for one of our lapel pins here?" And Pete got 2 out, and I gave them to the mother, and she bent down, and she pinned it on her 10-year-old. And this is what she said. "Okay, now you have to live a life of character. Now you have to live a life of character." And I gotta tell you, I almost screamed, because that's what we wanna be. That's what you wanna be. It's not just about building champions or Hall of Famers. It's about helping every young man and young woman live a life of character. It's not just about how big you are or how fast you are or even your talent. When these guys are being recognized as one of the very best in history, they're talking about what the game did for their heart. And not just on the playing field, but what it did for them in life. And right now, it's an important time right now because, I do think that this is a game for life. And that's what you coach, not football, but you coach life. And you've talked a lot this week, I'm sure, about how the game is under attack. Scott and I have talked about it. I would heartily recommend to you a book by Daniel Flynn called The War on Football. It's a gentleman who started to write about concussions and everything out there. He came to the Hall of Fame to do his research because we are an archival research center on the history of the game. And he came back with a totally different conclusion. And when Forbes reviewed his book, the headline in Forbes says, "Everything that you're being told about football is wrong." He went into it, and what you're being told is obviously that guys are dying young, that they're committing suicide. And let me tell you, as Scott mentioned, I've got 2 boys who played the game of football. One played at USC for Pete Carroll when they were winning 35 straight. My other son played at Duke when they were losing 22 straight. But when we sat down for dinner, we both were talking about the same lessons in life. Sam went on to the NFL and just concluded 8 years, with the Atlanta Falcons. But if you Google the average lifespan of NFL offensive linemen, do you know what comes up? 56. And I gotta tell you, I love my boys more than anything in the world. And I wouldn't do anything to shorten their life by a day. But I also gotta tell you that Google is wrong. Google is really wrong. Because when I got this job, like I said, I started going to the funerals sometimes of these great Hall of Famers that were passing on, and nobody was 56. Chuck Bednarik, who may be the most hit man in history because he was a center and a middle linebacker for every play for 17 years, died at 90. Other guys at 88, in their mid-90s. Ace Parker, one of our Hall of Famers, died a couple years ago, 101. So how did this match up with what we're being told in the media? Well, Daniel Flynn came to the Hall and he discovered a National Institute of Health study that was actually done by the Players Association, who was telling players, you better take your pensions early because you're not going to live that long. So Congress had the National Institute of Health do a study. They took 3,689 players who were NFL players for at least 5 years. So these guys weren't in there for a cup of coffee. They got hit a lot. From 1959 to 1986, before all the changes in the game that have now made it safer than ever before. You know what they found? They found that the morbidity rate, the number of guys who had died in that subset was half of all of us who watch them on TV. And by the way, the suicide rate was half of all the guys who watch them on TV. where he found that of the top 17 killers of males, 16 of them, the NFL players lived longer and better than the guys who watched them on TV. The one where they did not was neurological degenerative disease. And even that was a small subset, where there were 15 NFL players and there were 5 of the guys who watched them on TV. And you've talked a lot about the kids we lost this year, and to lose one kid is an absolute tragedy. But we also lose 51 last year on skateboarding and 800 on bicycles and about 70 on skiing. And you don't learn the values of the game from that. And I think that it is not just because of football. Yes, this can be a violent, tough game. But you know, when I was a kid, the reason I'm doing this is because I'm repaying a lifelong debt. You see, my mom and dad couldn't read or write. They came from Arkansas and Mississippi. We got a long line of trailers in our family. But they came out to California. My dad worked in a lumber mill. And one day, a guy selling encyclopedias came to the door. For those of you who don't know what that is, before Google, there were encyclopedias. And to seal the deal, because my mom cared so much about me, they put their hard-earned money into this. The guy said, "Tell you what, I'll give you another set." And it was The History of Civilization by Will and Ariel Durant, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, the rise and fall of the Greek Empire, the rise and fall of the Persian Empire. I don't know if any of you remember that or have it at home, but it was a celebrated volume. And because my parents worked so hard for it, I actually read it. And what Will and Ariel Durant said was that every great empire has at its core competitive values that created competitive character and a competitive economy. And because of that competition that was respected so much, that the empire grew as the character of its people grew. But here's some of the things you learn when you go out for any sport, but especially for football. You know, there's that point where you try out for the team. And you're uncomfortable because you don't know anybody, and you got to go out there, but you kind of figure out, you know, I want to make this team. You begin to aspire to something. You begin to dream. And you learn that in football. You learn commitment. You know, once you're on that team, you learn that, you know, it's really special to be a part of something bigger than yourself. And this incredibly strange thing that when you surrender yourself to a community of others, that you actually become more relevant, not less. You learn diligence, because once you're on that team, you got to start working real hard. And you learn integrity, because you got to know right from wrong. You got to know the rules. You got to know, you know, your role and what you have to do. You got to learn the discipline. You got to do it right every time. When you're in training, my son, till the day he retired, he would work on his kick step as a left tackle. And you have to learn it over and over again. You have to have the discipline of just doing it right. You have to have courage, because just like Tony Dungy said, sometimes you're going to get knocked down. And I'll tell you, all of us get knocked down in life. You know, it may be losing a marriage or fighting for your marriage or a healthcare crisis or an ethical crisis. But when that happens, I guarantee you, I have never heard of anyone say, you know, I was in trouble, I didn't know what to do, so I went back to my calculus teacher or my chemistry teacher. And if some of you are educators, I don't mean to offend you, education is critically important. But our schools have become a place where character is almost shunned, because people are, in a sense of political correctness, saying, we don't want other people teaching their values to our kids. Well, we're part of the Church of Football here, and this teaches character. Once you learn courage, you actually learn encouragement, the Greek word of giving courage to others. And what a wonderful thing it is for kids to learn to encourage others. Perseverance, everybody has to overcome adversity, and you learn this in this game. Respect, like I talked earlier, respect for yourself, respect for your teammate, respect for your opponent, respect for authority. This is critically important in our society today, because some people don't have respect for authority. Forgiveness. The great Aeneas Williams, one of our Hall of Famers who's a cornerback, we had him not long ago at an event like this, and we said, what's the most important lesson you ever learned? He said, what I've learned as a cornerback is you better be able to forgive yourself for screwing up if somebody scores over the top of you, because you've got to come back and play the next play. And if you don't forget the past, you won't be ready for the future. And Aeneas Williams is a pastor now today in Ferguson, Missouri. And let me tell you, he's doing great work because he's saying, I can't believe how many people in their own life can't forget the past so that they can move forward in the future. Responsibility, to be accountable for my job. My son spent about 16 years at the highest level of college and professional football. He only touched the ball twice. Somebody fumbled and he jumped on it. But his job was not to throw it or catch it or run with it. His job was to protect it. And there's people in our companies, people in our communities whose job are protectors, and there's auditors, and there's accountants, and there's lawyers, and everybody's got to learn to work together and handle their own responsibility. You've got to learn how to communicate with them. Think about that huddle that you teach 7-year-old kids to get together, to put your head in there, to look at each other in the eye, to listen, to learn, to express yourself, who should communicate when. And by the way, there's adversity on the other side of the line. And when we break this huddle, we're going to break it together. Some of you remember the days, and maybe you do it in your league, where the guys held hands as a sign of unity. And there are big problems in this world, and we need to be together to solve them, to have the confidence that we are prepared and ready because we have respected somebody in authority who has coached us up to get there. Humility, to understand that this is my place in the world. You know, I don't have to be at the front of everything. And that, just like Brett Favre said, I think I learned more from losing, and I appreciated winning more because of the times I lost. Pride, the satisfaction of a job well done. Trust. Now, trust may not seem much to you as a coach, but I think trust is critically important in the NFL. You see, my son at a left tackle had to trust the guy who was 5 positions away at right tackle that he was doing his job and that he was going to read the defense exactly the right way. And if every guy reads it the same way, all of a sudden they shave milliseconds off of their performance. And those milliseconds come together and magically make a touchdown or create a turnover. So trust is critically important in the performance of a football player's job. But it's even more important in a marriage. It's even more important in the leadership of a family. Hope. Hope is a magnificent thing. And we're going to talk about it in a second because it's never too late. Sportsmanship, the business side of me coming out. Clearly understanding how to do the right thing in every situation. Love. It probably doesn't seem like you're talking about love all the time, but frankly, that's what you're teaching. You're teaching kids at the basic core how to love each other, and you're teaching competitive excellence. With all the things that are going on in this difficult world, what you're learning, you're teaching kids to prepare for life. When Martin Luther King says, I dream of a day that my 4 children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. He's talking about football. You see, my son, he doesn't care if you're on that offensive line with him, whether you're black or white or Hispanic or Samoan. Actually, he thinks Samoan is even better. But the only color that matters is the color of his uniform on that day. And that, I believe, has changed the world. It's all about inspiration and hope. It can change cities. Green Bay in 1960 is a little city of 90,000. And then a guy named Vince Lombardi that comes, and it's called Titletown. In the 1970s, Pittsburgh loses steel. Can you imagine that? The team is named the Steelers, and they lose the steel industry. And because of that, they lose hope. And then they sign a guy named Mean Joe Green. And Mean Joe Green kind of gives some inspiration and some hope to this locker room, and it spreads to the practice field, and it then spreads to the playing field, and it spreads to the stadium, and it spreads throughout the city when there's an immaculate reception and they win a Super Bowl. And today, Pittsburgh has reinvented itself as a great city of technology. San Francisco, in the 80s, they were divided. It's a situation where their mayor and their supervisor was assassinated. And all of a sudden, Eddie DeBartolo buys the 49ers, and Bill Walsh comes to town, and then Joe Montana, and Steve Young, and Jerry Rice. And all of a sudden, the entire town is united in football. In the 90s, it's Dallas. They got a recession. They win a couple Super Bowls. All of a sudden, real estate's back. And you know the story of New Orleans after Katrina. Steve Gleason blocks a punt, and they march all the way to the Super Bowl, and all of a sudden the music is back in New Orleans. Of the top 50 TV shows last year, rated by Nielsen, 46 were NFL games. 25 of the top 25. And the reason is, I think, is because we love watching these values. Right there in front of us is this Shakespearean play of redemption, of triumph, of defeat. All of that was critical on the greatest day of the game to me. You see, I was in New York on 9/11. I could look out the window and I could see Tower 2 as I turned from the television set. I couldn't quite see it fall. I was on the 34th floor, but I could see all the debris rise up. And I remember how that city was paralyzed and how our nation was stunned. And I was participating as a friend with Paul Tagliabue and Roger Goodell, and they were trying to decide, whether or not to play the following week. And they decided not to because, frankly, on that day, there were more important things than football. But the following week, to me, was the greatest day in the history of this great game. If you remember, for everyone in an NFL stadium and for 100 million watching on TV, we as a nation began to huddle up. We kind of got our bearings and we climbed to our feet again. And we came together because every stadium became a church or a cathedral or a temple. So much so that 10 years later, we had a Super Bowl in New York for all the world to see that you can knock us down, but you can never knock us out. I had the experience a while ago of going to Walter Reed Hospital when I was commissioner of the Arena Football League. And John Elway and John Bon Jovi were going to go with me to see these guys that were coming back from the battlefield. And at the last moment, those guys had to cancel. And I'm not a Hall of Famer, and I'm not a rock star. I'm just a 400-pound guy in a suit. But one of my staff said, your name is on the ball as commissioner. Let's take them each a ball. And I got to tell you, on that day, I was humbled by a guy who apologized to me because he couldn't accept the ball with his hands because he had no arms. I left that guy and I went to another young man here who was from Iowa, and he was missing his right arm right at his shoulder, his right leg right at his thigh, and he looked very unique. And I gave him a football, and he talked about what it was like to be in high school and the lessons he learned. When it rained, they'd all meet at the park to play. And his mother was in a rocking chair behind me, and being a father myself, my heart went out to her. And I knelt down beside her and I said, "Ma'am, God bless you." I said, "Thank you so much for the sacrifice your son has made." And I added, I said, "I'm so sorry." And I got to tell you, she put me in my place just like that. She said, "Oh, you mean that? Don't you worry about that. He's been knocked down before. He knows how to get up." And then she smiled and she said with the greatest of confidence, "I know he will." Gentlemen, that's where you know when you're a coach. That's what it's all about. I don't know if you know where the word coach comes from, but it actually comes from a French word. When the guys who were in the musketeers who were teaching with swords, they would be in a situation where they were teaching a certain way to fighting because you protected with your right hand and you protected the left hand of the guy next to you, and they needed somebody to teach that. And they needed a word for that person who's a teacher. And I don't know if you speak French, but the word for coach is entraîneur. It means caravan, because it's the fastest way to get a group of people from here to there. The English counterpart for that, the fastest mode of transportation for getting a large group of people from here to there, is the 8-horse-drawn coach. And that's what you do every season, is get your team from here to there. But what's the journey you're making? Is it just to be a better football player? Is it to be a championship team? Is it to be a championship coach? Or is it to be an outstanding young man? The best lesson that I ever learned was not in college, it was not in law school, wasn't in church. I was watching a college football game on TV in 1975. And I was doing what I love the most on a leisurely Saturday morning, reading the box scores. And I don't know if you have them where you live, but they have these things called Hostess snowballs. And I had them kind of carefully piled up here in a pyramid. And I was drinking Diet Coke to cancel out the snowballs. And I'm watching this game, and it had Penn State in it playing somebody, I can't remember who. But it had this guy, Joe Paterno, who looked like Columbo with the horn-rimmed glasses, and I truly think that, I probably shouldn't say this in Indianapolis, but I think that history will remember Joe Paterno better than the NC2A, because I think he was a great man. I think he was a great coach. And he showed it on this day, because they were just doing this new thing where you interview a coach as he comes onto the field or as he comes off to the field, and right in the middle of his job, guy only works 10 times a year, and they want to interview him. So this was at the end of the second half. It was a Happy Valley. There's about 105,000 people in the stadium, millions more watching on TV. And a young guy named Jim Lampley sticks a microphone in Coach Paterno's face, and he says, "Coach, looks like you're going to win today. That'd make you 11-1. There's some controversy about you, the first team, the second team, the third team. Do you think you should be in the Orange Bowl?" And Coach Paterno, who was obviously thinking about the second half, said, "You know, Jim, maybe, I don't know. That's for others to decide." And Lampley still had some time, so he was searching for a question. He said, "Well, Coach, is this the best team you've ever had?" And Coach Paterno said, "Well, Jim, gosh, I don't know. I'm not sure, but probably not. I'd say it's probably the team from 1963 at Brown University." Brown University. I kind of put my paper down. I began to focus in more on the interview, and Lampley asked my question, "Well, Coach, who were they?" And he said, "Oh, Jim, I don't know if you know. They only won 3 games." Well, now I'm kind of totally off the couch, and I'm totally zoomed in on this TV, and Lampley, sure enough, asked my question. He said, "Coach, this team's 11-1, and they're probably going to be in the national championship game, and that team only won 3 games. How could this team not be as good as that team?" And I'll never forget what he said. Right there in the middle of his job, in the middle of a game, in a stadium of 105,000 people and millions more watching on TV, he leaned over and he said, "Oh, Jim, I don't know if you know, but off of that team in '63, I lost a kid in Vietnam." He said, "I got a congressman, I got 2 state senators, I got 4 bankers, I got 5 guys who are lawyers." And he went through as if he knew where every one of them was. And he concluded by saying, "You know, Jim, there's a great football team on the field today." He said, "But those guys from '63, they're changing the world." And that's what I want for you. I hope someday you can send us a Hall of Fame player. I hope every one of you can come to the Hall of Fame, which we like to think is the most inspiring place on the face of the earth.